When Donald Trump first entered the political arena, few could have predicted the deep and complex entanglement his presidency would have with Ukraine. What began as a diplomatic relationship soon spiraled into controversy, impeachment, and global political intrigue. But what is the real story behind Trump's clash with Ukraine? What truths remain hidden beneath the surface of official statements, media narratives, and political maneuvering? To fully grasp the depth of this conflict, we need to rewind the clock to before Trump even took office. Ukraine has long been a focal point of geopolitical tension, caught between Russian influence and Western ambitions. The country's struggle for sovereignty, its battle against corruption, and its desire for closer ties with the West have made it a battleground for powerful interests. The United States has played a major role in Ukraine's affairs, providing military aid, financial assistance, and diplomatic support, particularly in the years following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. By the time Trump became president, in 2017, Ukraine was already deeply intertwined with American politics. The Obama administration had imposed sanctions on Russia, backed Ukraine's government, and provided military aid to help Ukraine fend off Russian-backed separatists in the eastern regions. Joe Biden, then vice president, played a key role in U.S.-Ukraine relations, frequently pressuring Ukraine to enact anti-corruption reforms. One of the most significant moments of this era came when Biden urged Ukraine to fire its prosecutor general Viktor Shokin, who was widely accused of corruption. But this is where things took a dramatic turn. Shokin had been investigating Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian energy company that had, controversially, placed Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, on its board. While no definitive evidence proved wrongdoing on Hunter Biden's part, his lucrative position at Burisma, while his father was overseeing Ukraine policy, raised eyebrows and fueled speculation. Trump and his allies saw an opportunity. Fast forward to 2019, Trump was gearing up for his re-election campaign, and Joe Biden emerged as his most formidable Democratic rival. Around this time, Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, launched an independent effort to dig up dirt on Biden, focusing heavily on Ukraine. Giuliani pushed a theory that Biden had forced the firing of Shokin to protect his son, a claim that lacked substantive evidence but gained traction in conservative circles. Then came the infamous phone call. On July 25, 2019, Trump spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The official record of this call would later become the centerpiece of Trump's first impeachment. During the conversation, Trump congratulated Zelensky on his election victory before pivoting to a favor. He asked Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden and his son. Trump specifically referenced the firing of the prosecutor and suggested Ukraine should look into it. This request was not made in a vacuum. At the time, the U.S. had approved nearly $400 million in military aid to Ukraine, but the Trump administration had quietly put a hold on the funds. Many viewed Trump's request as a quid pro quo, suggesting that Ukraine would only receive the aid if it complied with his demand for an investigation into the Bidens. This interpretation was bolstered by testimony from multiple U.S. officials who later stated that Trump and his inner circle had made it clear that military assistance and a White House meeting were contingent on Ukraine announcing an investigation. When news of the call and the aid freeze surfaced, it sent shockwaves through Washington. A whistleblower complaint filed by an intelligence official alleged that Trump had abused his power by pressuring Ukraine for personal political gain. The complaint led to a congressional investigation and eventually Trump's first impeachment in December 2019. The House of Representatives, led by Democrats, charged him with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The impeachment trial in the Senate, however, did not result in Trump's removal. The Republican-controlled Senate acquitted him, arguing that while his actions may have been improper, they did not warrant removal from office. Trump, emboldened by the acquittal, continued to insist that his call with Zelensky had been perfect and that the entire impeachment was a partisan witch hunt. But the Ukraine saga did not end there. The fallout from Trump's actions had lasting consequences on U.S.-Ukraine relations and shaped global perceptions of American foreign policy. Zelensky, who had initially sought to maintain good relations with Trump, found himself in a precarious position. He was leading a country dependent on U.S. military aid while trying to navigate an explosive political controversy that could jeopardize his nation's standing with one of its most critical allies. At the same time, Trump's approach to Ukraine sent mixed signals to Russia. While his administration ultimately released the aid and provided Ukraine with military assistance, including lethal aid that the Obama administration had hesitated to send, Trump himself often struck a softer tone on Russia. He repeatedly cast doubt on the U.S. intelligence community's assessment that Russia had interfered in the 2016 election and even suggested, without evidence, that Ukraine might have been the real culprit. Trump's impeachment over Ukraine was not just about a single phone call. It was a reflection of the deeper battle over American foreign policy, corruption, and election interference. The episode exposed the fragility of international alliances and underscored the extent to which foreign governments could become entangled in U.S. domestic politics. As the 2020 election approached, the Ukraine controversy remained a central issue. Trump and his allies continued to push allegations against the Bidens, while Democrats used the impeachment as evidence of Trump's willingness to abuse his power. In the end, Biden won the election, but Trump's handling of Ukraine left a lasting impact on political discourse. The situation took another dramatic turn after Biden assumed office. With Trump out of power, U.S.-Ukraine relations reset, but Ukraine remained a flashpoint, particularly as tensions with Russia escalated. By early 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, igniting a war that reshaped global politics. The conflict further highlighted the importance of U.S. support for Ukraine, raising questions about how different administrations handled the relationship. Trump, now out of office but still a dominant force in Republican politics, took a different stance on the war. While many in the U.S. government rallied behind Ukraine, Trump made headlines for questioning the extent of American involvement. He criticized the Biden administration's approach and claimed that if he were president, the war would have never happened. His remarks reflected a broader debate within the Republican Party, with some members advocating for continued support for Ukraine, while others pushed for a more isolationist stance. Even in 2024, the Trump-Ukraine saga remains relevant. Investigations into Hunter Biden's business dealings continue, with Republicans using them to attack Joe Biden's credibility. Trump, now a leading candidate in the 2024 presidential race, still frames his impeachment as part of a broader effort to undermine him. Meanwhile, Ukraine's struggle for survival against Russia keeps the country at the center of U.S. political discourse. So, what is the hidden truth behind Trump's clash with Ukraine? Was it a legitimate concern over corruption, or was it an abuse of power for political gain? Did Trump's actions weaken Ukraine's position, or did they ultimately strengthen it by pushing the U.S. to provide more military aid? The answers depend largely on perspective. What is clear, however, is that the Trump-Ukraine controversy was never just about a single phone call or a single investigation. It was about power, influence, and the way foreign policy can be weaponized for political battles. It revealed the vulnerabilities in America's political system and demonstrated how international relations can be manipulated to serve domestic agendas. As Trump seeks a return to the White House and Ukraine continues to fight for its survival, the consequences of their past clashes remain ever present. The legacy of this controversy is far from over, and the next chapter is still being written. The clash between Trump and Ukraine is more than just a political scandal. It is a reflection of the broader struggles between power, influence, and global diplomacy. The story doesn't just involve Trump, Biden, and Zelensky. It extends to deep-rooted tensions between the United States, Russia, and Europe, as well as the internal struggles within Ukraine itself. To truly understand the depth of this conflict, we need to examine the motivations behind the key players. Trump's approach to Ukraine was shaped by his larger worldview, one that often questioned traditional U.S. alliances and sought to reshape foreign relations to align with his personal and political interests. Unlike previous administrations that viewed Ukraine as a crucial partner in countering Russian aggression, Trump saw it primarily through the lens of domestic politics. His primary concern was not necessarily Ukraine's sovereignty or its struggle against Russia, but rather how the country's internal affairs could be leveraged in his battle against Joe Biden and the Democratic establishment. From Trump's perspective, Ukraine was a potential source of damaging information on his political opponent. His belief that Ukraine had meddled in the 2016 election, despite overwhelming evidence that Russia was the true culprit, was fueled by a mix of conspiracy theories and selective intelligence reports promoted by figures like Rudy Giuliani. This belief led him to push for investigations that could benefit his re-election campaign, even at the risk of damaging U.S.-Ukraine relations. For Ukraine, the stakes were far higher. As a nation embroiled in a long-standing war with Russia, Ukraine relied heavily on U.S. support, not just in terms of military aid, but also in diplomatic backing and financial assistance. The country had been striving to align itself more closely, with Western nations seeking membership in NATO and the European Union as a means of securing its future. However, the Trump administration's actions created uncertainty, making it unclear whether the U.S. would remain a steadfast ally or if Ukraine would be used as a bargaining chip in American domestic politics. Zelensky, who came into office as a political outsider promising reform, found himself trapped between two powerful forces. On one hand, he needed continued support from the U.S. to counter Russian aggression. On the other hand, he risked being dragged into an American political war that could undermine his legitimacy both at home and abroad. His cautious approach, avoiding direct criticism of Trump while refusing to explicitly commit to the requested investigations, demonstrated the delicate balancing act he had to perform. The fallout from Trump's actions extended beyond the impeachment process. It had long-term consequences on U.S. foreign policy, reshaping how allies viewed American commitments. The delay in military aid to Ukraine raised questions about whether the U.S. could be trusted as a reliable partner, especially when crucial support was seemingly tied to personal political favors. This skepticism was not lost on Russia, which saw an opportunity to test the limits of Western resolve. Some analysts argue that Trump's handling of Ukraine indirectly emboldened Russian President Vladimir Putin. By casting doubt on U.S. support for Ukraine and repeatedly signaling a softer stance toward Russia, Trump may have given Putin the impression that the U.S. would not strongly oppose further aggression. This perception could have influenced Russia's decision to escalate its war against Ukraine in 2022, calculating that Western nations might be hesitant to intervene. At the same time, the Trump administration did approve military aid that previous administrations had not. While Obama had supported Ukraine diplomatically and economically, his administration stopped short of providing lethal aid, fearing it might escalate tensions with Russia. Trump, despite his personal controversies regarding Ukraine, did authorize lethal aid, including Javelin anti-tank missiles, which later proved critical in Ukraine's defense against Russian forces. However, the larger question remains. Was Trump's approach to Ukraine driven by a strategic vision, or was it primarily about self-interest? His defenders argue that he was right to scrutinize U.S. aid to Ukraine and question corruption within the country. They claim that Biden's involvement in Ukraine, particularly Hunter Biden's business dealings, warranted investigation, regardless of political implications. On the other side, Trump's critics argue that his actions were not about fighting corruption, but about weaponizing foreign policy for personal political gain. They point to the fact that Trump did not show the same level of concern for corruption in other nations receiving U.S. aid. His selective focus on Ukraine, they argue, was purely because of its connection to Biden, making it an abuse of presidential power rather than a genuine policy concern.